Roundtable at Transport Topics, the news leader for the freight industry. Today we'll start our discussion by recapping Infrastructure Week, and later on we'll tackle the topic that will be on everybody's mind next week, highway funding. Joining us today are Jennifer Scholtes, transportation reporter at POLITICO Pro, Stephanie Beasley, Federal Transportation Policy Reporter at Bloomberg BNA, and Matt Fuller, House Leadership Reporter at CQ Roll Call. We want to encourage you to interact with us during today's chat. You can email us at share@ttnews.com, this article page. All right, let's get started. Happy Infrastructure Week, everybody. This is the end of Infrastructure Week, and they had like dozens of panels, not only in Washington, but also around the country. And, I just really wanted to recap some of the numbers and that all the experts kept bringing up this week. The whole thing about 1 in 9 U.S. bridges being in need of repair, and that was from Transportation for America, the American Society of Civil Engineers, giving the U.S. infrastructure a D+ in their 2013 report card, and also the group of engineers reminding us that we're going to need $3.6 trillion by 2020 just to modernize and maintain our existing infrastructure. And we also heard from, state departments of transportation officials and mayors, and let's just remind everybody that Secretary Fox is a former mayor. Mayors were on Capitol Hill on Tuesday saying that, we need Congress to act. We're going to need a long-term plan, and right now that they can't do it all alone. And then infrastructure dominated the national headlines because we had a high-profile accident with an Amtrak train on Tuesday. It was a deadly crash. Even President Obama weighed in on it, not to suggest that it was our aging infrastructure that caused that accident, but just to remind everybody that the Northeast Corridor and the transportation system writ large, is in need of an upgrade. And Jen, at Politico, you guys wrote about the Amtrak train.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the week started out just packed with it was all going to be about Infrastructure Week. I write the morning transportation newsletter, and in the roundup of events, my whole lead and everything was all about how Infrastructure Week was going to dominate everything, and then you really saw the Amtrak event take that over and fit in a way with that narrative of like how do we invest and how do we do better? Like, yes, we have roads, but are they good enough? Do we, Amtrak is generally safe, but there's this technology that we could install that, we're a few months away from getting it on every mile of Amtrak in the whole country. Yeah. PTC was the acronym in Congress this week that you heard everyone saying, and for lawmakers, I think it really hit home more than ever because you had Senator Carper was on that train right before it crashed, and on Wednesday morning he was just mobbed with senators coming up to him, putting their hand on his shoulder and saying, "I'm happy that you're alive. I'm happy you got off." And he has said that he is going to go up on Saturday and try to visit the hospital because they said that they were just too overwhelmed for his visit earlier this week. But lawmakers have been going back and forth from Pennsylvania. We had our most senior reporter or senior transportation expert, Kathy Wolf, go up there, and she spent 2 days in Pennsylvania. She just came back.
Oh, wow.
So you really saw all of the attention going to this emergency, and in a lot of ways kind of hitting home some of the things that people were trying to talk about more broadly with Infrastructure Week.
And Senator Carper, at one point, I think when he was governor of Delaware, I could be mistaken, but he was on the board of Amtrak, and in an interview, I think in Roll Call, he said that that crash was one of the worst he'd seen, and the whole time that he worked at, he was with Amtrak. Now, the issue came up on the House side, at the House Appropriations THUD Transportation Funding Bill markup. Congressman Mike Simpson of Idaho, he told Democrats that it was beneath them, quote, to suggest that lack of infrastructure, lack of funding for Amtrak, resulted to this. And then you had Congressman Israel, Democrat of New York, respond and say that he wasn't making the connection, but he was just reminding everybody of this. And then we even had Speaker Boehner.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
tell us what happened with.
Well, that was an interesting situation. So, as you said, I think most Democrats on the Hill didn't want to use this as an opportunity to sort of say, look at our crumbling infrastructure, because first of all, no one really does know the exact thing that happened here, and it is a tragedy, obviously. But Republicans almost were, too quick or too ready for this attack, and with Speaker Boehner, when he received a question on Thursday from a reporter saying, oh well, is this related to our crumbling infrastructure? She couldn't even finish the question before he was jumping on her. Are you really going to ask that? And he sort of stormed off stage after that whole thing. But as he sort of said, the train appears to be going over 100 miles per hour. Yeah. And obviously there is some issues here that you could bring up with the infrastructure, but I think Republicans were really ready for that attack. Certainly, you had the transportation, the T-HUD markup that next day, where there's an amendment. They're trying to restore a lot of the funding that's in Amtrak, and that gets rejected. And obviously, that becomes a really politically charged issue with this whole accident coming to light here. So yeah, I think that it's an interesting situation on the Hill, because you're right. I think there's a bipartisan acknowledgement that infrastructure in this country has been crumbling for a long time. You sort of run through the facts there, but you have also a system where a lot of these Republican members don't have Amtrak, don't have trains in their own districts. I think it's 184 congressional districts don't have one train stop, commuter train stop in their district, and 116 of them are represented by Republicans. So they don't really have much of a stake in this issue. So there's certainly a lot of Republicans making noise about, okay, this particular instance is a tragedy, but let's not politicize it, and that's certainly an argument that I think a lot of people are cognizant of.
I understand where the speaker came in that press conference yesterday, where he dismissed the question, and then, as you said, he did walk away. Not the right structure. And Republicans, when he was the chairman of the TNI committee, he didn't have a hearing on that. He didn't want to talk about that. And Republicans on the Senate side, Senator Susan Collins, she was the ranking woman on the transportation funding panel. Patty Murray, that was her home state where that collapse happened, and really didn't have bipartisan support to talk about that. And then we also had, the collapse in 2007 and the bridge in Minneapolis, where that was, former TNI chairman Oberstar said that was the opportunity to raise the gas tax, and it's really enact a long-term funding vision plan for the country. Stephanie, if you want to weigh in, not only Infrastructure Week, but do you think that it's okay to bring up the aging infrastructure now that we have the train crash?
Well, one of the interesting things I think that happened is, as Jennifer said, this really brought a lot of attention to a technology called positive train control. And there is a bill actually on the Senate side that would delay implementation of this technology for an additional 5 years. So it would be 2020 instead of the end of this year, which is the deadline now of 2015. So that bill is headed, presumably to the Senate floor. And so I was sitting in on the call yesterday with Senator Blumenthal and Senator Markey from Massachusetts, and they were basically talking about how they're going to fight this bill. This is sort of being used as something to really embolden senators who were originally opposed to this bill. They wanted to do it in sort of 1 year increments. If you need more time, we'll give you a 1 year extension, but only until 2018. So it is really interesting to see this bring attention to sort of low-lying issues and bringing it out to the forefront. But in terms of Infrastructure Week, I think, the markup of that House bill, the House spending bill. Yeah, it was like the focus, of course, going into this week, I'm thinking about all these Infrastructure Week events, but that really became sort of like the touchstone, I think, for this week was that markup, and it got really heated in there with, the representatives going back and forth about this funding issue for Amtrak, and, this bill would cut $260 million from Amtrak, but there's also a passenger reauthorization bill that passed out of the House that would cut, I think it's about 40% of Amtrak's funding. So, I mean, this is something I think that's definitely not going to go away, and we still have to wait to see what the Senate's going to do.
And I thought it was also telling that to lead off the markup, the chairman, Hal Rogers, he immediately went with, I feel, we have our condolences and our prayers to the people who died in that crash. So, obviously it was, undermining, it was expected, they knew it was going to come. Now, going ahead, when the transportation funding bill, is there going to be an expectation? I'm still, calling, people on the Hill, but have you heard there's going to be an expectation that Democrats are going to, make an attempt to inject some more funding when it reaches the floor?
Yeah, I think that we're still trying to figure that out. Obviously, this latest bill was filed today with the Rules Committee. It is simply just a reauthorization of basically the Highway Trust Fund itself. It wouldn't add any money. They have the additional money that runs them about through July. This would basically just reauthorize them to be able to collect like the gas tax to continue going here. Certainly, Democrats are going to use this as an opportunity to attack the fact that maybe some Democrats do feel like we need a gas tax increase, or that this is another instance where Republicans who are as the party in control are sort of responsible for this sort of thing, but that this is an instance where infrastructure should be addressed, or the gas tax should be raised. But obviously, this is the smallest punt of the punts that you can make, right? Of the options that you had on the table here, we're talking a 3-month, maybe a 6-month to the end of the year.
Yeah.
This is simply just the bare bones minimum to sort of keep this thing going. And obviously it needs to happen next week. There's a lot of difficulties here that still need to be cleared for a long-term bill, but long-term bill it's an evasive sort of accomplishment, because they tried to do this for years. It's a very difficult thing because there just really isn't the revenue that they want for a 5-year bill.
Exactly, and I just want to remind us that for you and the Senate, see how from the House to the Senate, senators come in, and sometimes colder. What's the landscape, train?
Mm-hmm. So for the approps bill, these are separately. There's all these different funding bills and authorization bills. Some policy, some stuff is funding. But for the approps bill that was marked up Wednesday, Republican senators have already started to say, we're not taking as hard of a line on this. Senator Collins, who's in charge of the money that goes toward transportation, she's on that subcommittee, she said, I don't necessarily, we're not looking specifically at Amtrak, but I do want to set aside more money in this appropriations for fiscal 2016 for rail safety in general, that assuming that some of that would go toward Amtrak as well. She's worried about crude by rail, about passenger rail, all types of rail. She wants to see more money there. So this is how the spending process goes. You the last step either. So
yeah. And this could go all the way. This is what Congresswoman Nita Lowey, the ranking member on the THUD panel, said, that she's afraid that we're gonna have an approach large omnibus bill toward the end of the year. Is that something that you think is on the radar?
Well, it's definitely been sort of what's happened the past few years. And I mean, I think part of the conversation that was interesting too during that House markup, Hal Rogers, who's the chairman of the House Appropriations Committee, was just talking about sequestration. And of course, there are funding caps. And I think that's part of what's really hindering, I guess, this discussion, or at least it's a big part of why there's this debate about how much more can we give, because the president and Congress agreed to these funding caps, and now where do you get the money from? If you give more to Amtrak, how do you offset that? So that's something that definitely I think is going to be a big debate.
Yeah, and the president's request is obviously not going to go anywhere. You had the chairman of the THUD committee, Diaz-Balart of Florida, calling the request borderline fantasy. So
I think Hal Rogers called it illegal.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Matt, any heads up on when the T-HUD bill could reach the floor in your well plugged in sources?
Yeah. Well, I mean, obviously they're making their way through the appropriations bills in the House. We've seen in the past the old like T-HUD goes down with a thud sort of appropriations where they've had to pull the bill in the past. Certainly, it seems like, as you sort of said in the past, the Senate hasn't really done appropriations bills. This isn't going to go, spending isn't going to move through regular order, right?
Yeah.
So, the best you can hope for really is the omnibus or a minibus situation. But I think that everyone sort of got their eye toward the end of the year here, sort of the October deal, when the new fiscal year starts coming around. These appropriations bills are really just sort of practice for them to, work on their typing or something here at this point. They're not really going to get these bills through and signed to the president. So it is, in that sense, the whole process is actually a fantasy. But yeah, I mean, they are important, obviously, to sort of lay down the markers of where these things are. But that's just basically a messaging thing, which is what the president's budget request really is as well. So
yeah, and Chairman Rogers was very proud of the fact that this was the earliest that these passed approps bills. I think he even said in recorded history. I didn't look that up.
Well, we'll see if it translates to them actually getting it to the president.
Yeah, so he was very proud of that. And I do want to get to the highway funding bill. And then as you mentioned, there is a new legislation from Congressman Ryan and Congressman Bill Schuster that's going to go before the Rules Committee on Monday. But if we can take one last step back, okay, so maybe a philosophical question, but we have the Amtrak crash. We're not making a causal link, and we had the 2013 bridge collapse, 2007. We can go back. I remember in West Virginia, there was pipelines bursting. I know Politico did a big expose about our aging pipeline system. What's it gonna take? What's it gonna take to get some of these members' attention? Because I was at a panel Monday, and one of the speakers for Infrastructure Week, and one of the speakers says, well, we're all going to wait for the big one to happen. Do you guys, you buy into that, that concept?
I guess what the speaker said, they're going to wait for the big one to happen, like a big incident?
I don't agree with that. I think we've had the big one. I thought it was 2007.
Yeah.
That it's very difficult to get lawmakers' attention, to act.
Supporting infrastructure spending is always a concept that's out in the ethereal, right? Where lawmakers can always say, I support renewing our infrastructure spending or whatever, but when we get down to this sort of specifics of legislation, right, where what are we going to spend on, what are our priorities, and when you look at the facts as you sort of laid out, like 1 in 4 bridges, which is more than 147,000 bridges, are structurally deficient, right, or functionally obsolete, are the terms. So when it gets down to actually spending money on those things, that's when congressmen sort of start balking, like, wait, it's going to cost this much. When it's just sort of out in general, there seems to be this bipartisan appeal, this support for, we're going to spend money, we're going to fix our infrastructure. But then when it gets into the specifics of, well, that bridge isn't in my district, right? It becomes, it's almost an exercise in log rolling, right?
It's not my problem.
It's not my problem, right? So if there's, I get one bridge and everyone else gets one bridge, then I have to foot the bill for 434 bridges that I don't want just for that one, right? So it becomes difficult, and miraculously, if your district doesn't have any bridges that don't need any repairs, so this is a difficult.
You're in a non-infrastructure district.
Yeah, somehow you've made it through,
like
just living in the forest, right?
Yeah.
So Don Young, I guess.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I think that the difficulty here obviously is finding support in Congress for these sorts of things, bringing it from the ethereal into the very specific sort of infrastructure spending that they want.
And that seemed to be where things kind of fell apart, because I know when this Congress started back in January, there was a lot of optimism about infrastructure funding. And, one of the famous sort of like bromances was between Secretary Fox and then House T&I Chairman Bill Schuster. They were going everywhere together and talking about, we're going to do this.
Had a Twitter fest.
I mean, it was just a lot of love going on there. But then, the administration put out their proposal proposal, this 6-year, $478 billion like reauthorization plan, and Bill Schuster's like, I don't like it. So,
That's right.
so I think when you get to the funding, yeah, it's just like where the split happened. So, and they still haven't seemed to have come to any kind of consensus on how they're going to fund all of this.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, thank you, panel, and remember to send those questions. And right now, I do want to shift to the highway funding, and we turn to the highway funding debate on Capitol Hill. And to set us up, this week we interviewed Janet Kavanoky, the Executive Director of Transportation and Infrastructure at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. She joined my colleague, Jonathan Reiskin, in a Skype interview, and we have a clip.
Let's talk about hitting walls for a moment. The two things in the news currently are, one, it's Infrastructure Week, and two, Congress, both houses, are working on funding for surface transportation. There are two schools of thought. One says, let's go back to the good old days where we have a 6-year or so long-term plan. We plan out things rationally over a period of time. We fully fund them. Another says, let's get by the next 2 to 7 months. We'll do some stopgap funding because we can't really reach an agreement. Do you think, to handicap the race, do you think we're looking at patches forever? Or is it conceivable that we could actually get to the point of a long-term solution anytime?
There really is actually one solid school of thought, which is we need a long-term, fully funded transportation bill. And that belief is pervasive across Congress. There are some naysayers who would rather see state and local governments take over all of transportation. There are some people who ideologically just don't want to see the federal government in transportation. But I think that it's to the credit of leaders in the House and the Senate, whether that's Bill Schuster and Peter DeFazio in the House, or it's Jim Inhofe and Barbara Boxer in the Senate, that they've made the case that the federal government needs to be a player and we need long-term bills. The problem here is finding the money. And finding the money comes down to, do you believe we need a user-funded system, or is it just too hard to deal with user funding and now we have to go and find other ways to pay for transportation? Because we've moved away from the concept that we should be paying based on what users pay, it just throws transportation in with every other federal program that is looking for revenues. And that's what's complicating this discussion and debate. I do believe, yes, we're going to end up with an extension here in the next week or so, but everything I'm being told, whether it's the Ways and Means and Finance Committees, which are the ones that are really, driving the proverbial truck on this issue, or it's the authorizers in House Transportation and Infrastructure, Senate Environment, Public Works, Commerce, and Banking, is there is a lot of hard work going into finding the money for a long-term bill. So, I'm optimistic so long as that we can keep some pressure on Congress, so long as states, governors, state DOT directors, mayors keep telling Congress, here's why you've got to do your job. As long as we don't become an afterthought, we can actually get a bill done.
I'm guessing that the authorizing people you mentioned in House T&I or Senate Environment, Public Works, et cetera, they seem to talk to each other, and I wouldn't be surprised to see an inventory of projects to work on that they could perhaps agree on. But the paying for it all seems to be the issue. Is that how you see it, or is there different log jams?
I think that the authorizing committees, the ones that deal with policy and programs that are linked to delivering projects, to speeding up project delivery, to making investments in freight transportation, that decide what are the priorities and where will the money go, I think those folks can really come to agreement. MAP 21, Moving Ahead for Progress in the 21st Century, actually made historic reforms to the policies and programs. I think the real problem right now is the question of paying for it. And this is a different challenge that has faced transportation advocates in the past. It used to be with earmarks and with the ability to really identify projects in every congressional district in every state, that the power was held with the authorizers, that they could go to leadership and say, we're ready to pass a bill, we're ready to show America that we can bring home projects to them that matter. Now you're talking about really having to focus on the Finance and Ways and Means committees, and they've got a whole lot of other things on their plate that aren't necessarily related to fixing the transportation problem. So as transportation advocates, we're going to have to be smarter about understanding the entire legislative playing field. We're going to have to care about what's going on with TPA, with Trade Promotion Authority, or the Ex-Im Bank. We'll have to care about what's going on with tax reform or tax extenders. We've got to pay attention to more than just what we used to, which is how do we drive a transportation bill. We've got to figure out where in the legislative process we fit.
I want to thank my colleague Jonathan Reiskin and Janet Kavanoki for taking time to talk about the status of the highway funding and the importance of having a long-term bill to businesses. That's the platform of the Chamber of Commerce. And Kavanoki, as you guys know, she was at that hearing the Senate Commerce Committee had on long-term funding, the need for having a long-term funding solution for transportation. And at that hearing, McCaskill, Senator McCaskill, Democrat of Missouri, she said that it was a joke that with 27 days left or whatever it was at the time, that we didn't have a highway bill. And I think she was referring to the short-term patch, not like a long-term highway bill. But today, we have some breaking news, and Politico was the first to report that, the TNI Chairman Bill Schuster and the House Ways and Means Chairman Paul Ryan, they have unveiled an extension that will take us through July. And this is actually hot off the press. We have a statement that they've issued, a joint statement, and quote, "It was our preference to move an extension through the end of the year, but we will need more time to reach a bipartisan agreement on offsets. This legislation will allow transportation spending to continue through July while we work toward the next step to close the trust fund shortfall." And it's worth noting that yesterday, Senators Boxer and Carper unveiled similar legislation. I don't know if it's identical, but the rules is going to meet on Monday about this. What do you think? Where do we go from here?
Well, obviously, this is the short-term patch, as I said, the smallest punt of punts, right? So this issue is just kicked off for a little bit longer. Now they have to do some more of the real work here to try to find the offsets. The problem is, in Congress, you never want to use your real offsets for something that everyone sort of agrees you want to do, right? So everyone's looking at this and saying, what are the sort of the fake offsets, the fake pay-fors that you can use for a highway bill? And then obviously the difficulty is too that if you want a long-term bill, those pay-fors have to be a little more real than just the smallest sort of things. Now, I think Senator Hatch had said this week he was open to the idea of black liquor as a pay-for, which is, it's just like a byproduct of making actual paper, and it's really just one of the most gimmicky sort of pay-fors that they have in Congress, which really signals that no one wants to pay for this thing in a real, meaningful way, right? This is something that, by and large, both sides agree they want to do. It's just you don't want to use the money that you have in offsets to pay for something like the Highway Trust Fund when everyone sort of agrees from both sides that they want to get this done.
It was worth noting that Congressman Ryan was very adamant last month in a breakfast with reporters hosted by the Christian Science Monitor, where he said, we're not going to raise the gas tax. That's off the table. I want to, because the bill is sponsored by Ryan and Schuster, I want to assume that it has the backing of fellow GOP colleagues. But that hasn't been the case, as you guys know, for legislation that House leaders have been very passionate about and wanted to pass. Jennifer, can you talk about the political landscape and some of the state of play? That not only at rules, but also going forward. When it reaches the floor, presumably as early as Tuesday.
Yeah. So Republicans really wanted to extend through the end of the year, which is a little bit different than this 2-month patch, because a 2-month patch is only a policy patch because we actually haven't run out of money yet. So
yeah, the trust fund still is going to be operable through July.
So this one that they're now opting for, the 2-month patch, is a lot easier of a lift because, as Matt said, you don't have to come up with money to do that. And Chairman Ryan and a lot of other Republicans were holding out and trying to come up with just enough money to extend both policy and funding through year's end so that they could then, fingers crossed, get a tax overhaul and use the money from tax overhaul to fund highway projects and do this for multi-year. So everybody has the same goal of wanting to provide some kind of temporary patch to buy them some time to do a multi-year bill. But there's just some different ideas, as Matt said, about where you come up with that money. And nobody has been as against, the 2-month patch or the year-end patch. Both sides just wanted different things. The people who have been advocating for this 2-month patch have said, let's align this with the expiration or the operational low of the Highway Trust Fund, so that then we only have 2 months to kind of rally again, and we keep momentum, and then we come up with a multi-year plan in the next 2 months, which sounds incredibly ambitious. So we'll see what they come up with. But in the end, they just ran out of time and couldn't find the money for the year end. So they said, let's do this free thing that just gets us to this other point. So it really just keeps the heat on to where we're going to be seeing this become a problem right before they want to leave town in August. So they will have to come up with money then, or else there will be no money.
And then when we say they're going to run out of time, it's worth noting they had 10 months to come up with something. And Stephanie, the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee has scheduled a markup in July about this. What do you think that says? You think senators are very serious about this, and they Inhofe and Senator Boxer, they're going to collaborate and present a plan that everybody's going to be happy with?
Yeah, well, Chairman Inhofe and Ranking Member Boxer have been getting along pretty famously throughout this process, and they've made it clear that they really wanted to have a clean, policy bill by July. And, Senator Inhofe has said, when there were lots of talks about this end of the year patch, that he would support that. But it seems sort of reluctant. He really wanted to get something done, and he still does want to get something done by July. I actually ran into him in the halls of the Capitol recently, got an elevator with him, and he's like, I've been consistent. This is what I want to do, but if it takes 6 months, I'm willing to support that. But if it's 2 months, I'm willing to support that too. So yeah, they're going forward with a markup of a 6-year reauthorization bill in June, and I think that sends a strong signal that they're very serious, at least on that committee, about getting something done. Now, what still a question.
Well, and other Republicans in the Senate have said that's not realistic. That might get through the Senate, but there's no way the House is going to agree to anything that raises taxes. So you can have your 6-year bill, you can move that forward, you can think that's going to become law in 2 months, but Senator Hatch was the one who said, that is not realistic. This is not going to happen. So.
And we have a question from John. What happened to the 7-month extension that Paul Ryan was talking about? So I guess he's referring to, Paul Ryan saying that, I think I was at that breakfast, so saying that he wanted something to take us through the end of the year, and all of a sudden we see this July thing. Matt, have you heard,
well, it's clear what
House
happened.
leaders?
It's clear what happened to the 7-month thing is basically they ran out of time, and maybe they didn't have enough money. Obviously, by doing it to the end of the year, you're sort of starting to line up the things where people are at least thinking that you might be able to get some small component of a tax overhaul that will be able to pay for this. As you've said, Paul Ryan's been very clear he's not going to raise the gas tax, and even really Democrats have kind of come out and said we're not going to do that, which is why it hasn't been done since the early '90s, right?
Yeah.
So I think that Ryan's ambition was to be able to kick this out there somewhere and get some component of tax reform that they really wanted. Now the difficulty there is, as everyone sort of pointed out, if you're going to do a small component of tax reform, it just sort of reforming corporate taxes, it doesn't look so great if you're cutting taxes for GE and keeping individual tax rates the same, which for small businesses, when someone's filing as an individual, there's a lot of people in Congress will say it's unfair for a small bit. We're going to give a tax breaks to the largest businesses, but not to the small business owners. And then when you get to okay, let's bring the small business owners into it, and you start opening up the whole tax code, and it becomes too large of an overhaul, right? Which is the difficulty here. So the 7-month, just sort of went away with where we are right now in the debate. I mean, obviously this expires, and functionally for Congress, you're only talking a few legislative days that could actually get this done. So it may be mid-May now, but for congressionally schedule-wise, we're only like a week. So they have to get this done,
The House
immediately.
I think the House leaves on
Thursday, right?
And
So
the Senate leaves Friday.
right. So I mean, there really isn't the time for even haggling over a 6-month bill to get us to the end of the year. But that does suppose that there was actually ever a solution for a 6-month bill, that there was some sort of revenue that they could dig up, and it would have been on these sort of gimmicky pay-fors that a lot of people say really don't do anything for actually paying for the actual highway trust fund. It's certainly not a gas tax increase.
Yeah, and when I talk to transportation sources, they tell me, and it's an obvious obvious comment, but if we think solving the issue with the highway trust fund is difficult, when you talk about tax reform, that's the big 800-pound gorilla.
Yeah, I mean, if we're in the highway world, you always hear the highway trust fund, or we're going to do the gas tax, but tax reform, they've been doing the same sort of every year. This is the year for tax reform, right?
Exactly.
And no, next year will be, that's going to be the year for tax reform. Well, it's the same sort of situation we have now, and I think Paul Ryan's learning that. Although, I think he did come in with some expectations of, well, this is actually still a very difficult thing, and he really looked to the trade deals first, and which is part of the difficulty here is, you put too much on Paul Ryan's plate with. He's trying to get this trade promotion authority across the finish line, let alone trying to get a tax deal for 6 or 7 months to pay for a highway trust fund. So.
Yeah, and we have a question from Sheila. This one, you guys can take it out. What do you think can realistically get passed in both houses of Congress? Second part, is it possible to pass a long-term solution this year? Who wants to take it?
Well, I think the difficult. So, I mean, a 5-year deal is difficult, and you've seen this in the past with when Democrats were in control. A 5-year deal was difficult. So, is a long-term deal in the cards? That's tough to say. I mean, as I said, when you start dealing with the longer-term bills, you're talking a lot more money to pay for, and the offsets have to start getting real at that point. Otherwise, you have an agreement from both sides that you're not going to pay for it, and that is maybe politically untenable at this point. So maybe what we do see is, gets to July, we can get to the end of the year again on another sort of small patch, which they will have to pay for. That'll be the first real test, because they'll actually have to come up with some money for that. But then, a 5-year deal, that might be a little bit too difficult for Congress. Maybe a 1 or 2 year deal. But once again, we don't know. We're looking at a landscape here that's trying to game out months in advance. And if they could get to this sort of the grand bargain deal, because there's a lot of deadlines that are kind of coming up on here. You might have an omnibus before October. You might have some aspect of tax reform. If they could get to that grand bargain deal, anything could be possible in that way.
And if we look at, let's talk about the dynamics in the House. You have establishment Republicans, you have your House GOP leaders, you have your Democrats, if we want to say the Pelosi camp, and maybe some independent Democrats, for lack of a better term.
Blue dogs.
Blue dogs. Then we have some of the lawmakers affiliated with Tea Party organizations.
Conservatives.
Conservatives. Very conservative. The Tea Party angle on transportation recently has been this devolve the federal transportation back to the states. When you look at, back to the state of play, this coming week, are the conservative GOP, going to stand behind a patch, and is there an expectation that devolution is going to come up again? That this is the window for devolution, that argument to come up?
I think you start to see all of these options. People getting kind of learned on what all of their options are, and jumping into the debate when you have this deadline pressure, and that's one of the things it's one of the reasons that people were gunning for that 2-month patch. Like Matt said, this is the shortest punt, but in a way, some people saw it as like the most brave of the punts, because it then meant that you then have to face this question again. And there's people who are involved in transportation, on the transportation committees, who have to come up with, and those who have to come up with the money to fund transportation, kind of know where they stand. Like Ryan knows where he wants to come up with the money. Hatch knows, generally where he might come up with the money. But when you take like the whole conference or the caucuses on their own, I think the idea is keep the pressure on so that people can decide if they're going to say only devolution is their only option I could support, or I could support a gas tax or whatever. Like you only see what the masses will agree to when it's like, hey, tomorrow we have no more money. So exactly. I think that's one of the things that we'll see play out if we do, we have this 2-month patch. If they don't come up with some kind of magic money, you'll see people start to kind of sort out in those camps. And then, it could be, you could then see something through the end of the year, or you could see another 2-month patch or a couple-week patch, or who knows what you're going to come up with. But the idea from some people who have been around for a long time, like Senator Inhofe, he has said basically like we can't let this go on for longer, because last time we did 10 months, basically people only started paying attention last week. So
exactly.
like let's get this going.
And once again, you sort of said this before, but this bill will not really face the opposition that a longer term measure would, because really you're just renewing the authority to for the Highway Trust Fund to collect the gas tax, right? It's already operating and already has the money that it needs. This is sort of just get it to July on the existing money that it has. So that this isn't going to be that contentious of a debate unless Democrats really jump in on this and say, wait a minute, you have a responsibility here to come up with something more meaningful than just a 2-month patch, and they might try to say that. And certainly, kick around a lot of these sort of infrastructure, statistics that we've heard and we've kind of gone through here a little bit. But ultimately, no one wants to see the Highway Trust Fund just sort of, collapse, for lack of a better word.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't have the authority to continue collecting the gas tax. It has the money, so this is really just the most basic sort of solution for a couple months to get to that point.
And
I was going to say, it would be interesting to see, I guess, how people will react to this patch, because I know at that Senate Commerce Committee hearing that you mentioned, Senator McCaskill said that she was basically questioning the U.S. Chamber of Commerce about the possibility of lawmakers opposing a short-term patch.
Yeah, exactly.
So we don't know if that's something that's going to happen, but also, I was at an event yesterday where Representative James Renacci, is Republican from Ohio, said that he told himself last year when there was a 10-month patch, passed out of Congress, that he wasn't going to do it again. So, he has a proposal right now to index the gas tax to inflation, and then I think it would be until 2016, and then give lawmakers time to come up with a longer-term solution. But, you do kind of wonder, people like this who have said they don't like the idea of a short-term patch, how they'll react to that this week. I don't think anybody wants it to default, though. So,
I think the 2-month patch the people who are opposed to that have, clearly have decided that, that this is their only option, and I don't think there's going to be any real opposition. If you see the leaders, you see people like Schuster, you see people like Ryan, McConnell filed, started going through the procedural process last night.
And he said we have to do something before Memorial Day. They will do something before Memorial Day.
Yeah, and so they've got it going so that it won't be too painful, like they did the Rule 14 process in the Senate, so that they don't have to do, rely on people to do some kind of like procedural backflips next week, that this will be like mostly smooth sailing if that's what they do decide to do, and then you see the House follow suit. I would highly doubt anybody. I'm sure people will complain, but people were still going to complain if you did a year-end patch. People were going to say, this is another patch. A patch is not good in anyone's mind. They all agree that there needs to be some kind of long-term solution. So I don't see this as, like Paul Ryan totally threw up his hands and is that people are going to be really mad at him about this. And also, like, not all these lawmakers really know exactly what's going on. There's only like a dozen people who really know that policy is going to expire next week. And you saw that with Senator Inhofe was saying, now that everybody knows that the 2-month patch is free, they're all about it. So you saw that they didn't understand that we didn't actually need more funding for 2 months. And so I think that the lawmakers who aren't totally focused on this will pretty much fall in line.
And Stephanie, you brought up the Congressman Renassi legislation that would index the gas tax, and I was under the impression, talking to people on Capitol Hill, that was going to get some legs, and that was going to get more attention. But can you talk about some of the funding proposals out there? We got public-private partnerships, and that was a big theme during Infrastructure Week. Obviously the gas tax, but also vehicle miles travel. What have you been writing about? What's it been on the radar for you?
Well, I think a lot of the big proposals, of course, was, raising the gas tax to 18.4 cents per gallon. Gas tax hasn't been raised since 1993. So I talked about Congressman Renassi's proposal. Also, Representative Blumenauer from Oregon had a proposal to raise it, I think it was 15 cents.
And almost every stakeholder supports that bill.
Yeah, and he actually criticized Renassi's proposal as too complicated. He thought, he said you should just raise the gas tax and leave it at that. So, that's something that's been supported by, the Chamber of Commerce, the union groups, but it doesn't seem,
everything.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to go, and it hasn't gone anywhere at this point.
Yeah.
So, one of the more popular ideas, I think, has been tax repatriation, which is to take, these foreign earnings, offshore earnings, and repatriate them back to the United States. The Obama administration, of course, has
the Grow America Act.
Yeah, the Grow America. Grow America Act, which they put out, which would be a 14% one-time mandatory rate for that.
Which Secretary Fox called a new and improved Grow America Act.
Right.
Yeah.
But also doesn't seem to be going very far at this point. And then you have others in the Senate. There's a proposal from Senator Boxer and Senator Rand Paul, for 6.5% for voluntarily repatriated earnings. And then Senator Deb Fischer just came out with a proposal this week.
Infrastructure bank.
Yeah, also 6.5% voluntary with an infrastructure bank. So you have a lot of these proposals on the House side. Of course, Congressman Delaney from Maryland had a proposal that would create an infrastructure bank. And
he's been pushing that for now until his second term now.
And it seems like a lot of people like that idea, but it just, it's unclear at this point. Bill Schuster over at T&I said that he didn't like the idea of creating an infrastructure bank, that it could be another Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac. So those are some of the ideas that are being floated out there. But I mean, in terms of tax repatriation, it's still like, the question is, when you talk to, Chairman Ryan, he said that, he doesn't want to do something like that unless it's part of this broad tax overhaul. So, if they were giving themselves originally until the end of the year to do that, because of course they have other tax extenders, things that come up at the end of the year, I don't know where that's going to go at this point, but yeah, those are just some of the ideas that are out there.
And you brought up Senator Rand Paul. And for anybody who doesn't know, I heard that he's running for president. And you have other senators who have said that they're going to run for president. They're running for president. And that's something, we have a collection of questions with the same theme, that if we have this 2-month patch and then we end up having a patch through December, then next year is 2016, and everybody, including the media sometimes, will be focusing all about the presidential. And I just want to read a quote from Senator Carper, the Delaware Democrat, where when he introduced the 2-month bill that he and Senator Boxer have, he touched on that, and that is, that our governors, mayors, citizens, and businesses are counting on us to do better than we did last summer and give them the certainty they need for a 21st century transportation system. I fear the alternative, kicking the can closer to another election, 2016, is a recipe for letting them down yet again. But that is a valid point. Presidential years, not a lot of things get, not quote, a lot of legislative things get done, but if we come to that precipice and then we just have a short-term extension through December, we don't get that multi-year bill, is that a valid point? What happens in 2016 with transportation?
Well, certainly, if you thought that a gas tax was, dead, it's certainly dead if it gets to 2016, right? Because then you put this as an election year issue,
Who's going to vote for a gas tax?
Right, exactly. And I think this is one of the few issues, and this is why we haven't seen this increase since the early 90s, is that one of the few issues that actually gets through to average Americans who don't pay attention to politics, who say, wait, you're going to raise 5 cents, or 15 cents, or whatever it may be, indexed to whatever. No one wants to see gas prices go up, and even when they were at their lowest, right, when we were hovering around 2, or in the winter, it was clear that politicians were, steadfast and out their tax. Again, immediately prices are, where we were. I think people were looking at that as an actual alternative in a way that you could pay for a lot of these sort of things. But add 2016 into that. We've already seen that the gas tax doesn't seem to be going anywhere. What happens when you put an election into the forefront here is that all these issues become just more politicized, and every senator who is running for president and some who aren't running for president are just running for re-election, and House members who are running for re-election
every 2 years.
Every 2 years, right? And frankly, every member is on the perpetual campaign. So, putting the politics into it and injecting the election into it just makes this issue a lot more difficult to deal with, whether it be on the tax side to come up with pay-fors, or whether it be on something like a gas tax, even just talking about a gas tax, right? That could be politically dangerous too. So.
Yeah, going beyond this year makes everything more difficult, and that's probably why Chairman Ryan, he definitely wants to get tax overhaul done sooner than later, and I imagine that his goal is to get that done before the end of the year, because he knows that nothing's going to happen next year either. So you want to align those things so that you can, ideally they wanted to buy themselves enough time to get their tax dream accomplished, and also use that revenue to pay for this, all the infrastructure stuff that they want, and so they saw it as a desirable thing in that way.
Maybe to just so what I'm looking at is that if they don't they don't have a multi-year bill. Let's assume EPW is going to pass the 6-year bill, and send it to the Senate floor. And the Senate doesn't move on it. The House, obviously, is probably going to wait for the Senate to do something. So then we'll be looking at a highway bill after, when we get somebody else in the White House. Is that like the assessment right now?
Certainly possible. I mean, if a 5-year is elusive here, then I think that we are looking at after the next election and kicking this to a point where we can get to another president, where the next campaign and the next election are a little bit further off.
Got it. Let's to wrap up, it was Infrastructure Week, and just. So for some final thoughts, I just got to say that it's always a good week when, Vice President Biden reminds us that LaGuardia Airport, is similar to a third world country airport, as he did on Monday morning, and you were there. And I just think it's funny, I know Merkel or David Cameron says, hey everybody, the airport in my biggest city reminds me of being in a remote part of the Saharan desert or the Congo, but he does have a point about the infrastructure, so that's Infrastructure Week, and any final thoughts, about the week or highway funding and what we're looking at next week, I mean?
Yeah, I think next week for sure is going to be a busy one. I mean, I'm expecting this 2-month short-term patch will get passed, and then we'll look forward to, I guess, more sort of debates happening in summer. But But yeah, I think Infrastructure Week, it came at a really interesting time with all of this happening. I mean, I was, as you mentioned, I was at the Biden event, and he was just making some remarks saying that in his 30 years, I guess, as a senator, he didn't remember
Mind-blowing.
it ever being, so partisan, this issue, that infrastructure was something that everyone could get behind. And I think, as I mentioned earlier, you did see a lot of that bipartisanship at the beginning. It's just this funding question, and I think that's something that is going to haunt this Congress until, who knows when. How do you come up with funding for this? And so, yeah, that'll be interesting to see moving forward.
Okay. Well, I want to thank the panel, and thank you for your insight, and we're going to be watching your work. My thanks to Politico Pro's Jennifer Scholtes, Bloomberg BNA's Stephanie Beasley, and Roll Call's Matt Fuller. Make sure you follow them on Twitter. Also, many of my colleagues, I want to thank my colleague Jonathan Reiskin and Janet Kavanoki with the Chamber of Commerce, who joined us in a pre-recorded interview. Also, thanks to the behind-the-scenes crew at Transport Topics and ATA for their production. And if you weren't able to watch all of this, there's going to be a replay at ttnews.com. Also, I want to mention we have a special subscription offer for our viewers. Please visit liveonweb.ttnews.com/specific. Subscribe, for details. And if you have, if you enjoyed the program, please follow us at liveonweb.ttnews.com. And then subscribe in the fan club. You just might win a Transport Topic mug. Again, it was Infrastructure Week. Thank you, everybody, and thanks for joining us.